And joining me now is Counselor to President Trump, Kellyanne Conway. Ms. Conway, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you, Chuck.
Let me just start with, to get you to respond to the central allegation, both in Woodward's book and this anonymous op-ed, that the president isn't fully in charge of his presidency. How do you respond to that?
I totally disagree with that, and apparently so do General Kelly, General Mattis, and other people who have come out to push back on specific quotes attributed to them. I thought General Mattis's denial this week was relevant for what he denied, but also for what he affirmed. In denying that he would ever use contemptuous language against the elected commander or tolerate it in his presence in the very vast Pentagon that he oversees, he also affirmed his commitment to the successes in the defense and national security space that this president has achieved. General Mattis mentioned that the ISIS caliphate is all but gone. He mentioned that the pay raises, the first military pay raise in quite a while, that defense policies are received honorably and amicably on Capitol Hill. So there are tremendous differences, tremendous gains. I think the president's consternation probably derives from the fact that we always have a handful of sources, and all of this is like the fifth consecutive book where it's basically a few people.
How do you? Why should
trying
we
to curate their own images?
Why should we take your word for that? You say there's what you said 5 books. I'll go with, we had the Michael Wolff, we had Omarosa, we've had various reporting. Now you have Woodward and the anonymous op-ed. You say it's a few people. That's a lot of. Are you saying a few people are the source for all of these folks?
No, you're looking to curate their.
It's a lot of people when you start adding them up.
As somebody who above board met with Bob Woodward to figure out what the book was about or how I might help, and came back and took that to the White House, certainly, as we all know.
And did you stop the president from ever speaking to Bob Woodward? Why did you?
I did not.
He seems to think there was a disagreement in that recording. He seems to at least indicate he wanted to speak with Bob Woodward.
And then he said this week it wouldn't have helped. It wouldn't have made a difference. People write.
But he did want to speak to him. You guys stopped.
Well, the president likes to speak to everyone. And let me.
Did you just not bring the request?
No. Yeah, I'm on tape saying exactly what is true, which is I brought the request back and it was rejected. I also have to believe. I also have to believe.
The president?
That if you're
not answering whether you brought the request to the president.
I didn't bring the request to the president directly, and the president says that she could have because she has direct access to me. But all that doesn't matter. This does. What the president said to Bob Woodward matters greatly. He said, Bob, I hope the book at least covers this boom economy, the labor, the wages, the growth, the manufacturing jobs, the construction. I mean, you can't deny, and even somebody's poison pen in an anonymous op-ed or the vitriol spewed all day long on some stations can't really touch the corners all across this country, Chuck, where people are feeling the economic boom, where they feel safer and more prosperous. You can't touch it. He has given voice and visibility to folks who felt invisible and forgotten. They are better off because of his policies, and that's why I'm there. That's what I care about.
In fairness, actually, the unnamed person who wrote this, because it's obviously not anonymous to some people at the New York Times, the unnamed person did write, don't get me wrong, there are bright spots that the near ceaseless negative coverage of the administration fails to capture. Effective deregulation, historic tax reform, a more robust military, and more. But these successes have come despite, not because of the president's leadership style, which is impetuous, adversarial, petty, and ineffective.
Okay, well, that is the intersection of arrogance and ignorance. And if this person really had the kind of courage and skills that some of us do, they'd come forward. You would put them right in this chair today. You would have cleared out the whole round table if that person would come forward. I'm sure he or she would get a hero's welcome, kill the fatted calf, roll out the red. But why, Chuck? Why? You're a longtime journalist, a responsible person. Would you have given anonymity? Would NBC have felt comfortable doing that if it turns out it's not a true senior administration official? Why are we imbuing credibility and authority to somebody who hasn't earned it? We can't run around all day saying facts and truth and transparency and accountability if we're imbuing credibility to every anti-Trump messenger that comes along.
Let me ask this. What kind of West Wing is it that everybody is quietly, Gary Cohn, look, Bob Woodward had receipts.
Everybody is not doing that. Excuse me, everybody's not doing that.
That there seems to be,
everybody's
more
not
than a
doing
handful
that.
of people leaking anecdotes, venting their frustrations.
You realize a lot of people have been forced out and fired. You realize other people left on their own accord. And it's tough to not be.
Let me ask this. Why
it's not for everyone. As the vice president has said, it's not for everyone. I know that firsthand. But it is for those of us.
Let me ask this. Who runs the staff? Who's in charge of the staff?
The chief of staff.
Well, then, is the chief of staff doing his job if there are so many rogue leakers
Put me
running
down as
around?
pro-General Kelly.
No, I understand that. But at some point, who are these people that don't listen to him?
Don't listen to whom?
General Kelly.
General Kelly? these are people in books and in, I guess, anonymous op-eds. I'm not even sure they know the president or know John Kelly. It's not clear to me. Who are, I think, motivated by conceit and deceit. And that person is going to suss out himself or herself, because cowards, like criminals, always tell the wrong person. They always confess their crime to the wrong person.
Do you trust everybody you work with right now?
Yes, I do. And I'll tell you what happened this week. The team tightened up even more because of all of this. Folks who don't even work together because they deal in different portfolios, different issues, folks who don't know each other that well, some new, some who have been around as an unbroken thread from the campaign like me. We are tighter this week because we are so joined in our outrage. And yes, I hope we learn the identity of the person, but why elevate the person? I'm more interested in giving voice and visibility to folks who have felt forgotten for so many years. Do you understand that the president doesn't
trust the staff right now? Would you understand if he doesn't?
I think the president should have real concerns about having large meetings where sometimes there are people included or who are substituting for other people that maybe he doesn't know well. And I think every president deserves to have a leak-free,
sure,
ridiculous, anonymous op-ed-free type of White House. But Chuck.
So are you going to fire leakers? Are you going to fire these leakers if you find out who they are?
There are some leakers who are long gone. They're just leaking now to authors and books, so they're long gone. Mm-hmm. And actually that's gotten much better. We've seen that. I think that President Trump deals best in smaller groups because he loves to hear dissenting opinions, disagreement among his staff, and then he'll have somebody who's for this and for that on different sides of the spectrum on a particular issue, but he knows he's the democratically elected commander and president who ultimately makes that decision. That's leadership. Somebody who surrounds himself or herself with people who disagree, but who try to brief the president properly. But you're not covering all the good things. I mean, I just want to say one thing to you.
Let me ask this. He called it treason. Why is it treason? The op-ed writer?
It depends. If this is somebody who, in fact, has access to national security information, and the president's made clear he doesn't want to be in a meeting with somebody who's dealing with Russia, China, North Korea, who has access to that type of information and then is using it. How do we know what the person gave?
What is it in the op-ed that would make it treason?
What makes you think the four corners? How are we secure, Chuck, that the four corners of any op-ed are all that somebody who doesn't have the guts and the courage to come out and put their name to that op-ed? How do we know they haven't promised other things? How do we know they're not taking other documents? We know that early on it was leaked. The president's calls with the presidents of Mexico and Australia.
Well, we're not at war with anybody, so you can't really accuse anybody of treason. We're not at war.
But the president is saying, oh, come on. And people are openly talking about the 25th Amendment and impeachment. It's such nonsense. Look at the spectacle on Capitol Hill this week. Brett Kavanaugh will be confirmed later this month, and he will be seated before the October 1st Supreme Court term because that man is as qualified and dignified today as he was when he was first. I know you want to avoid that, but that's generational. All this is noise, ultimately, in history. Brett Kavanaugh will be there for decades.
The President of the United States wants the Attorney General to investigate. What law was broken here that the Attorney General needs to investigate?
It depends. There could be and there could not be. And so you don't know that and I don't know that.
So he has ordered the Attorney General?
Nobody's investigating an op-ed.
Has he ordered the investigation of who wrote this op-ed?
I won't talk about that. He has said publicly that he thinks that we should find out who this person is. I don't believe in giving this person so much elevation and oxygen.
But you're not.
We all want to know who it is.
So it's possible he's given an order to the Department of Justice to investigate this?
He has said publicly what he feels. You can roll the tape. He said it several times.
I understand that. Should it be taken? Should the Attorney General take it as an order?
If the Attorney General at the Department of Justice and FBI feels like they have oversight over a matter like this, then they will make that decision. It's an independent agency.
Does the president believe they have
What the president believes is that nobody wants to cover what America sees and feels because of his leadership. There's no denying there either are or are not 201,000 jobs created. Yes. Wages and labor and growth up. Yes, yes, yes. We were told there was going to be a global recession. President Obama preened around, what's it going to do with a magic wand? He's going to create jobs, and he's doing it without a magic wand. He's doing it because he reduced taxes where President Obama raised them during recession, because he deregulated where President Obama added to those regulations, because he doesn't believe in some phony red line in Syria where we have a humanitarian crisis. This president responded swiftly and decisively against Assad when he gassed his own people, not once but twice. We know that there's a totally different leadership in Washington.
Did he ever even in jest say to Defense Secretary Mattis, kill the guy?
I certainly never heard that. And General Mattis
possible
has
he said it in jest?
General Mattis has denied what is in that book and is attributed to him. And I want everybody to read his denial and his affirmation. And there's a reason that people like General Mattis and General Kelly are serving this president. They don't need to be here. They very much believe in the agenda, in a strong military and peace through strength, in trying to bring denuclearization, of getting out of the wrong-headed Iran deal. Benjamin Netanyahu, in his Rosh Hashanah message, is crediting this president for being a great partner. This president kept the promise of, kicked out a Nazi that other presidents refused to, and he moved the embassy to Jerusalem, keeping the promise of many presidents. Thanks for having me.
That was, wow. You even had wrapping up a thank you. Kellyanne Conway, I will leave it there. Thank you for coming on the Charity Views.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.